Ronald Reagan's self-deprecating manner endeared him to most Americans. And on the 100th anniversary of his birth, today's conservatives are lining up to salute the man and issue a warning.
Though government created the problem, now government presents itself as the solution.
America's 40th president sold himself as a champion of limited government.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Reagan reformed the tax code and deregulated markets.
We're going to turn the bull loose.
But he also exploded the national debt with defense spending. He fought the Cold War much more aggressively than his predecessors.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
In reality, Reagan was a far more divisive leader. His approval ratings often hovered around 50%, but his Republican descendants have elevated his status to icon of the conservative movement.
He refused to sit down and be silent as our liberties were eroded by an out-of-control, centralized government that overtaxed and overreached in utter disregard of constitutional limits.
A new generation of Republican politicians are connecting themselves to his legacy in an apparent bid to boost their political fortunes. In doing so, they hope to emulate Reagan's electoral successes and sweep Barack Obama out of the White House.
Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.
Cody Akavi, Al Jazeera.
The latest government figures show casino revenues in Macau jumped 33% in January from a year earlier to $2.3 billion. Much of that comes from hordes of Chinese mainland gamblers flocking to play in the nearby enclave. Rob McBride has more.
Welcoming in a new year that's proving particularly auspicious for Macau's tourism and casino executives, with record gambling revenues and visitor arrivals from mainland China.
I know China's very much in support of Macau. Lots of visitor numbers here and so on.
Well, yes, of course. Last year, the total visitation is over 25 million. We hope that this year we'll have another double-digit increase.
A further seal of China's approval for this bustling former Portuguese enclave, the arrival of two giant pandas, helping to bring in the tourist numbers. But it's the high rollers from China who are driving the casino boom.
They are very much driven by liquidity conditions in China. So if the bank taps are open, these guys are filling up their buckets and they're coming to play in Macau.
Their destination, the Cotai Strip, home to many of Macau's new mega casinos.
By any standards, it's a remarkable recovery, turning the Cotai Strip into arguably the world's most valuable piece of gambling real estate. And the predictions are that Macau is only just getting started.
Construction work that was halted during the downturn won't be stopped for much longer, and future resorts are planned. It's raised the stakes in the battle over one of the biggest casino groups, founded by tycoon Stanley Ho, seen as the father of Macau gambling. Now ailing and fighting a very public battle in the media with his wives and children over the control of his empire.
Can I quote you as saying that you feel as if it's robbery?
Yeah. There is partly a sense of, yes, watching royalty, watching royalty squabble. So there's a real interest factor in that. I think there's also a realization, though, of the fact that, this Stanley Ho himself, this grand old man who's run Macau for 40, 50 years, it's kind of a sad way for him to be going out.
Record visitor numbers during this New Year holiday are a taste of the growth that is to come. People like Tommy Wu and his extended family taking their first trip out of mainland China.
First time? First time. They come here the first time.
As they return across the border, the knowledge that millions more are to follow, eager to try their luck in the one Chinese city where casinos are legal. Rob McBride, Al Jazeera, Macau.
And before we go, let's just bring you up to date with what's going on in Egypt. It's day 13 of the protests there. Pro-democracy supporters have dubbed it the Day of Martyrs. Well, these are the live pictures coming in from Liberation Square in Cairo. More anti-government demonstrations are expected right across the country. Well, while this is going on, the largest opposition group, the Muslim Brotherhood, is due to hold face-to-face talks with the Vice President, Omar Suleiman. Well, that's it for now. Stay with us. We're back at the top of the hour.
The Brotherhood, even the Muslim Brotherhood, does not have the aspirations of the Iranians to create a kind of Islamic state.
Yeah, they're fine.
U.S. media coverage of the uprising in Egypt in the spotlight. Has their reporting of events been professional and impartial, or U.S.-centric and commercially driven? And what about the knock-on effect on the American public? Could the mainstream media's ratings war be driving them to create fear of democracy in the Middle East to make the story relevant to viewers? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Veronica Pedrosa. All eyes are on Egypt once again today. Do America's political stakes in Egypt necessarily mean that the US media's coverage of the Egyptian revolt would be controversial? Indeed, the US media's coverage has been described by some critics as a recipe for killing the democracy movement in the cradle. Mainstream American media has wheeled out the usual suspects to offer expertise on the issue, but do they really get it? Mohammed Shakir has more.
The obvious topic is the rapidly changing situation.
Across U.S. TV channels, scenarios about how things might develop in Egypt have been criticized by many as being both pessimistic and superficial. Their focus on what really matters, the impact of these events on the United States and its allies in the region. Egypt is suddenly big news in the U.S. But while the message of the Egyptian youth may have been given some attention on U.S. networks, do the Americans understand what they are saying? The young protesters' call for the removal of Mubarak and his regime was upstaged by concern for U.S. interest and the possible repercussions for Israel.
American commentators in general view the Egyptian revolution as all about the United States and Israel. It's almost as if the Egyptians don't matter.
3,000 protesters in the square of Cairo this morning.
The Fox News channel has been busy raising fears, suggesting that these protests carry an Islamic jihadist banner, raising concern about the uprising and trying to turn public opinion against the revolt and against how other journalists are reporting it.
Well, it may not be Al Jazeera's fault, but they have certainly contributed to rise in Arab anger. Al Jazeera makes a living blaming most problems in the Middle East on the USA and Israel.
Some observers see the coverage of popular uprisings in the Arab world by US media as markedly different to their coverage of similar events in other parts of the world. This bias is especially evident when compared with how the US media covered popular revolts in Eastern Europe.
Those revolutions, even though there would be all sorts of people, there'd be people on the right, there'd be people on the left, there'd be people who might have been pro-communist, anti-communist, whatever they were, we would look at the people in the crowds and identify with them because they were demonstrating against a repressive regime, so they're good. But when we look at a crowd of millions of Arabs, then we say, well, democracy is good, but maybe not this kind of democracy.
Egypt's protesters are determined to persist in their uprising until they reach their objectives of bringing down the regime. Despite the violent response by the authorities, with many journalists assaulted and detained, the US media has been forced to delve deep into Egypt's internal affairs, looking closely at its democracy, freedom, and the legitimacy of a regime allied with Washington. With headlines like the pro-Mubarak mobs assault protesters under the watchful eye of the army, the US media has had no option but report the facts.
Many of whom told me a few hours ago, I will not be happy unless he steps down.
Will these events bring about a fresh look by the US media? Will they now be forced to taking a deeper look at the region? Mohammed Shakir for Inside Story.
All right, well, joining us now are our guests. In New York, Jim Norekas, editor of Extra, that's FAIR's monthly magazine. FAIR stands for Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. It's an American-based media watch group. In London, Charlie Wolf, political commentator and broadcaster. And in Boston, Ali Benwazizi, Professor of Political Science and Director of the Program in Islamic Civilizations and Societies at Boston College. Benwazizi was also former president of the Middle East Studies Association, MESA. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. I'm going to start, first of all, looking at the US media and how it's been reporting over the last few days.